A mail-order bride arrived to marry a rancher, only to find his funeral and run his ranch herself. Clara was a young woman from a small town in Eastern Europe. Her life had always been quiet, simple, and filled with routine. She had grown up in a family that worked hard to make ends meet. Her father was a carpenter, skilled with his hands but often tired from long hours of work, and her mother spent her days managing the home and helping with neighbors' small chores. Clara had two younger siblings whom she loved dearly, and she often dreamed of giving them a better life than the one she knew. But in her town, opportunities were few, and most young women her age faced the same life she had always known. She wanted more. She wanted adventure, freedom, and a chance to see the world beyond her village. One day, while helping her mother clean the attic, Clara discovered a small, faded magazine. Its pages were filled with photographs of faraway places, smiling families, and advertisements that promised new beginnings. One page, in particular, caught her attention. It was an ad for a mail-order bride service. The words seemed to jump off the page. Start a new life in America. Meet a gentleman rancher seeking a loving wife. Clara's heart raced as she read it over and over. The idea seemed both strange and thrilling. A chance to leave her small town and travel to America, to marry someone who owned a ranch and lived in the wide-open countryside, felt like stepping into a storybook. She could hardly believe such a thing existed. And yet, as she stared at the photograph of the smiling man with sun-weathered skin and strong hands, she felt a spark of hope she had never experienced before. Over the next few weeks, Clara could not stop thinking about the possibility. She imagined what it would be like to live on a ranch, to wake up to the sound of birds singing, to ride horses across open fields, and to build a life with someone who might care for her. Every day, she wrote letters to the man in the photograph, introducing herself and sharing her hopes, her dreams, and her desire to work hard and make a good life together. She described her childhood, the small joys of her village, and the simple life she had led. In return, she received letters from him. His handwriting was careful, his words kind and thoughtful. He wrote about his ranch, the horses, the cattle, and the peacefulness of life in the countryside. He mentioned that he had lived alone for years and hoped to find a partner who could share his life, his home, and his love for the land. Each letter filled Clara with excitement and nervous anticipation. She felt a connection she could hardly explain. It was not a love born from meeting in person, but something that grew through words, through shared dreams and the promise of a future together. As the day of her departure grew closer, Clara felt a whirlwind of emotions. She was scared and excited, nervous yet hopeful. She spent hours packing her belongings carefully, choosing the clothes that were practical but also ones she liked. She included a few photographs of her family, some keepsakes from home, and a small journal where she had written her thoughts and dreams. Saying goodbye to her family was the hardest part. Her parents were proud of her bravery, but worried for her safety. Her father hugged her tightly, his rough hands trembling slightly, while her mother pressed a handkerchief to her eyes, whispering blessings and prayers for her journey. Her siblings clung to her, unable to imagine a life without her nearby. Clara promised them she would write often and send updates about her new life, though deep down she knew that the world she was about to enter would be very different from the one she had left behind. The journey to America was long and tiring. Clara had never flown on an airplane before, and the experience both terrified and fascinated her. She watched from the window as clouds stretched out beneath her, imagining the lands far below that she might one day explore. Every sound of the plane, the engines roaring, the wheels landing, the announcements in a language she was still learning, made her heart beat faster. She thought constantly about what awaited her, the man she had written to, the ranch, the possibility of a new life. At night she could not sleep, tossing and turning as she imagined herself riding horses across wide fields, cooking meals in a cozy farmhouse kitchen, and building a home from scratch. She wondered if she would like the man, if he would like her, and if life could really change so drastically in a single step. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, the plane began its descent. Clara looked out the window as the landscape changed from clouds to rolling hills, green pastures, and small towns scattered like puzzle pieces. She felt a surge of anticipation and nervousness. Soon, she would be stepping onto American soil, ready to meet the man who had filled her letters with hope and dreams. She clutched her suitcase tightly, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. Everything she had imagined, the new home, the new life, the chance for happiness, was about to begin. When Clara arrived at the small regional airport, she expected to see someone waiting for her. A man with kind eyes and a welcoming smile, ready to greet her and take her to her new home. Instead, she was met by silence and a strange, uneasy feeling. There were a few locals milling about, but no man with letters in hand, no smile of reassurance. She asked a few people, her voice trembling with hope and fear, and was directed to a small gathering at the edge of town. As she walked closer, her heart sank. She saw a black coffin, flowers, and people gathered with solemn faces. Confused, she hurried forward, trying to understand what had happened. That was when she learned the news. The man she had been writing to, the man she had dreamed of marrying, had passed away suddenly. Clara felt as if the ground beneath her had disappeared. All the excitement, the hope, the dreams she had carried for weeks seemed to vanish in an instant. She could not believe it. How could this be happening? She had come halfway across the world for a future that had been taken from her before it even began. Shock and grief swept over Clara. She could barely speak as the locals explained the situation gently. They told her about the man's life, about how much he had loved his ranch, how he had been respected in the town, and how sudden his passing had been. Clara felt a mixture of sorrow and loneliness. She was in a strange country, far from her family, without the person she had come to meet. The weight of it was almost unbearable. For a moment, she considered turning back, going home, and forgetting the journey she had begun. But as she looked around at the ranch, the rolling hills, and the land that had been cared for with love and dedication, a new thought began to form. Perhaps this land, this ranch, could be more than a symbol of loss. Perhaps it could become a new beginning, not the one she had expected, but one she could create for herself. As the first hours passed, Clara met a few of the ranch workers and townspeople. They were kind and compassionate, offering her comfort and guidance. Among them was Tom, the ranch foreman, who gently explained the daily routines, the responsibilities, and the challenges of managing the ranch. Clara listened intently, her mind absorbing every detail. She realized that she was standing at a crossroads. She could return to the life she knew, or she could step forward into the unknown and carve out a new path. The thought was daunting, but deep inside, she felt a spark of determination. She had traveled so far, written so many letters, and carried so much hope. Perhaps this was not the end of her journey, but the beginning of a new one, a journey she would shape with her own hands. That night, Clara sat on the porch of the small ranch house, looking out at the fields that stretched into the distance. The wind whispered through the trees, and the distant sound of cattle echoed across the valley. She opened her journal and began to write, her pen moving quickly across the pages. She wrote about her journey, her hopes, her fears, and the strange twist of fate that had brought her here. She wrote about her family, the life she had left behind, and the possibilities that lay ahead. As she wrote, she felt a mixture of sadness and determination. She knew that the path before her would not be easy, but she also knew that she had the courage to face it. The ranch, the land, and even the memory of the man she had come to meet could become the foundation for a life she would build herself. For the first time since her arrival, Clara felt a sense of purpose. She realized that life often did not unfold the way one imagined, but that did not mean it could not be beautiful. She could still find joy, strength, and meaning, even in the face of loss. With a deep breath, she closed her journal and looked out at the stars above, feeling a quiet determination to embrace whatever came next. Clara woke the next morning to the soft golden light spilling over the wide fields of the ranch. The air was fresh and cool, carrying the scent of earth, grass, and distant flowers. For a moment she allowed herself to enjoy the beauty around her, but the events of the previous day returned swiftly to her mind. John, the man she had come to marry, was gone. She had crossed an ocean with hope in her heart, and now she stood in a foreign land, surrounded by strangers, unsure of what to do next. The reality was heavy, almost unbearable. She felt lost, like a tiny boat adrift in a vast and endless sea. But as she looked at the ranch, the house, the barns, the pastures where horses grazed peacefully, she felt a strange pull. This place, she realized, held a story, and perhaps she had a role to play in it, even if she did not yet understand how. The townspeople had begun to return to their daily routines, but the small crowd from the funeral lingered near the ranch house, offering condolences and support. Clara moved among them carefully, her heart pounding with unease. Each face was kind, yet distant, carrying the weight of sympathy that made her feel both comforted and more acutely aware of her isolation. One woman, older and warm-eyed, approached her and took her hand. "You must be very brave to have come so far," she said gently. Clara nodded, unable to speak, feeling tears well up in her eyes. She had always imagined her arrival would be met with joy, perhaps a warm embrace from John, not grief and sorrow. But the woman's words, simple and sincere, planted a seed of courage in her heart. Perhaps bravery was not the absence of fear, but the act of moving forward despite it. Tom, the ranch foreman, had been watching Clara carefully. He was a tall man with broad shoulders, weathered hands, and a face that seemed carved from the land itself. He approached her slowly, his expression cautious but respectful. "I know this is a lot to take in," he said softly. "You didn't come here to see this, but the ranch, it needs someone. And I think you might have the strength to help." Clara looked at him, unsure whether to feel hope or despair. Strength. She barely felt strong enough to stand in this unfamiliar world. Yet something in Tom's tone suggested that he believed in her, even if she could not yet believe in herself. He took her on a tour of the ranch. It was larger than she had imagined, a patchwork of green fields, sturdy barns, and winding dirt roads. Horses trotted in the pastures, and a few cows grazed lazily, their bellows echoing across the valley. The barns smelled of hay, leather, and earth. She could see the tracks of hard work everywhere, the mended fences, the carefully arranged feed, and the tools left ready for daily use. Tom explained how John had managed it all alone: the feeding schedules, the planting of crops, the care of the animals, and the maintenance of the land. He spoke with respect and admiration for the man Clara had never met in person. As she listened, Clara felt a mixture of awe and fear. Could she, a young woman who had only known life in a small town, manage something so vast, so alive, and so demanding? The thought made her stomach twist with anxiety, but beneath it, a flicker of curiosity began to grow. The first days on the ranch were overwhelming. Clara had never fed cows, mended fences, or cleaned stables. Her hands ached from lifting hay bales, her clothes became dusty and damp, and the physical work exhausted her in ways she had never experienced. At first she felt frustrated and clumsy. She dropped tools, spilled feed, and struggled to ride a horse, falling more than once. The ranch hands, skeptical at first, watched her with guarded expressions. Some offered advice, others watched silently, uncertain if this young woman could handle the demands of ranch life. Clara felt discouraged, but she refused to give in. Each night she would sit by the porch, wiping the sweat from her brow, and write in her journal. She wrote about her failures, her fears, but also her determination. Slowly, she began to see that mistakes were part of learning. Each stumble was a step forward, even if it did not feel like it at the moment. As the days turned into weeks, Clara began to understand the rhythm of ranch life. She learned to wake early, greet the animals, and follow the routine that kept everything alive and thriving. She discovered the satisfaction of completing a task well, whether it was repairing a fence, milking a cow, or organizing supplies in the barn. Each small victory built her confidence. The ranch hands, too, began to see a change in her. Tom noticed that she was not just persistent but thoughtful, asking questions, observing carefully, and trying to understand the land rather than simply manage it. Slowly, the tension eased, and the team began to work together as a unit. Clara felt a sense of belonging she had not expected. She had come as a stranger, but the ranch, the animals, and even the people around her were beginning to feel like home. Yet life on the ranch was not without challenges. One morning, a storm rolled over the valley, dark clouds blotting out the sun and rain pelting the fields. Clara had to guide the horses into the barn and secure the feed and equipment. The wind tore at her clothes, and the rain soaked her to the bone. She slipped in the mud, fell, and felt every muscle ache with exhaustion. For a moment, despair threatened to overwhelm her. She thought of turning back, of returning home to the life she had left behind. But then she remembered the letters from John, the dreams she had carried across the ocean, and the people who depended on the ranch to survive. She stood, shaking but determined, and continued her work. By the time the storm passed, she had learned something crucial. Strength is not just in the body, but in the heart and mind. And she had both, in measures she had never realized before. Clara also began to learn more about John through the people who had known him. They shared stories of his kindness, his dedication, and his love for the land. They told her how he had dreamed of someone to share the ranch with, someone who would understand the animals, care for the land, and live with him in harmony with the seasons. Clara felt a deep sense of connection to a man she had never met face to face. It was as if he had been preparing this place for her arrival, even if he could not be there in person. She thought often of the letters she had exchanged with him, of the plans they had made, and she realized that life sometimes offered surprises that were not what one expected but could still be meaningful and full of purpose. Over time, Clara began to make the ranch her own. She developed small routines that helped her manage the work, feeding schedules, cleaning tasks, and organizing supplies. She discovered that she had a natural instinct for caring for animals. Horses, cows, and even the chickens seemed to respond to her calm voice and gentle touch. The ranch hands, once skeptical, began to respect her knowledge and decisions. Tom, in particular, grew to see her not as a visitor or a young woman who had come by accident, but as a leader, someone capable of guiding the ranch through challenges and uncertainties. Clara felt a growing pride in what she was accomplishing. She had arrived with fear and doubt, yet she was learning to trust herself, to rely on her instincts, and to embrace the responsibilities she had once thought impossible. Evenings were a time of reflection for Clara. She would sit on the porch, watching the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. She thought of her family back home, the life she had left behind, and the journey that had brought her here. Sometimes she would write letters to them, describing the ranch, the animals, and the challenges she faced. Other times she wrote in her journal, exploring her thoughts, fears, and hopes. These quiet moments gave her strength. She began to realize that though life had not turned out as she expected, it had given her an opportunity to grow, to learn, and to discover the depth of her own courage. By the end of her first year on the ranch, Clara had transformed from a nervous, uncertain young woman into a capable and confident rancher. She had learned the rhythms of the land, gained the trust of the ranch hands, and discovered a resilience within herself that she had never known. The ranch, once a place of sorrow and loss, had become a home. Clara understood now that life's twists and turns, though often painful, could lead to unexpected growth and fulfillment. She had arrived hoping for a life with someone else, and instead, she found a life with herself. A life full of purpose, challenge, and quiet triumph. Though she had come to the ranch expecting one story, she had discovered another. A story of courage, adaptation, and discovery. Clara realized that the true adventure of life was not always about reaching a destination or finding a person. It was about finding the strength and determination within oneself to face challenges, embrace change, and grow stronger through every experience. The ranch, the land, the animals, and the people she had met had all become part of that journey, guiding her toward a future that, though different from what she imagined, was rich, meaningful, and entirely her own. Clara had spent nearly a year on the ranch now, learning its rhythms, its challenges, and its small joys. She had arrived as a stranger, overwhelmed by grief and uncertainty, but she had slowly begun to feel at home. Yet as the months passed, she realized that living on the ranch was no longer just about adjusting. It was about making decisions, taking responsibility, and becoming a leader. The reality of John's absence weighed on her heavily. The ranch was his life, his dream, and now it was hers to manage. The thought was daunting. She had learned how to feed the animals, mend fences, and ride horses, but managing a ranch required more than physical work. It demanded planning, courage, and the ability to think ahead. She understood now that this was the true test of her strength. One morning, she rose early, the sun barely peeking over the horizon. The cool air carried the scent of wet grass and earth. She walked to the barn and checked on the horses, ensuring each one had fresh water and enough hay. Then she moved on to the cattle, feeding them and inspecting the fences. She noticed a section of fencing that had weakened in the recent windstorm. The wood was splintered, and one of the cows had been pushing against it, testing its strength. Clara sighed. She had repaired fences before, but now she had to consider the long-term stability of the ranch. She made a plan to order new materials and call the supplier, taking careful notes of costs and delivery times. The idea of managing the ranch's finances made her nervous, but she also felt a sense of responsibility. John had built this life with his own hands, and she could not allow it to fall apart. She would honor him by taking care of his dream. As she walked across the fields, Clara met Tom, the ranch foreman. He had become a mentor and gradually a friend. "I noticed the fence," he said, nodding toward the damaged section. "We'll need to replace the posts and reinforce it properly. I can help with the labor, but we'll need to order the wood and nails soon." Clara nodded. "I've already written a list and called the supplier this morning. We'll make it work." Tom studied her for a moment, a hint of surprise in his expression. "You've changed," he said softly. "You've grown into this ranch faster than I expected." Clara smiled, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. Praise was rare on the ranch, but his words carried weight. She had started as a nervous, unsure young woman, and now she felt a quiet confidence, born from months of hard work, persistence, and learning. Clara's days were full, often stretching from before sunrise to well after sunset. She learned to balance her responsibilities with careful planning. She made schedules for feeding the animals, repairing fences, planting crops, and maintaining the barns. She took notes on which areas of the pasture needed attention, which animals required special care, and which parts of the ranch could be improved. Each task required thought and care, and Clara found herself thinking constantly, planning not just for the day, but for the week, the month, and even the seasons ahead. Winter was approaching, and she had to prepare the ranch for the cold months, ensuring the animals would be safe and warm. She also needed to stock up on supplies, fuel, and food. The responsibility was immense, but Clara began to embrace it. She realized that leadership was not about being perfect, but about being determined, aware, and willing to take action. The The ranch hands, who had initially been skeptical of Clara, began to accept her as a leader. Some of them had doubted a young woman could manage the challenges of ranch life, but they could not deny her intelligence, persistence, and care for the animals. Clara learned to communicate with them clearly, listening to their suggestions while also making her own decisions. She discovered that leadership required patience, understanding, and fairness. She could not simply give orders. She had to earn respect through action, consistency, and thoughtfulness. Slowly, the team began to work together smoothly, each person understanding their role and trusting Clara to guide them. It was not always easy. There were disagreements, mistakes, and days when exhaustion made tempers short. But Clara found that problem-solving and compromise became easier as her confidence grew. One day, Clara received a letter from her family back home. They wrote with curiosity and concern, asking about her life, the ranch, and her well-being. Reading the letter, Clara felt a pang of longing. She missed her parents, her siblings, and the familiar streets of her village. She missed the smell of her mother's cooking, the laughter of her siblings, and the comfort of a place she had always known. But as she looked out across the ranch, watching horses graze and cattle wander peacefully, she realized that home was not just a place. It was a feeling, something she could build with care, effort, and time. This ranch, once a foreign and intimidating place, was becoming her home. She wrote back to her family, sharing stories of her life on the ranch, the challenges she faced, and the small victories she celebrated each day. She wanted them to know that she was thriving, even if her life had turned out differently than she had imagined. The seasons changed, and with each passing month, Clara's connection to the ranch deepened. She began to notice small details she had overlooked at first. The way the morning sun reflected on the pond, the patterns the horses made as they ran across the field, the way certain plants grew in the garden. She learned to anticipate the weather, to recognize the moods of the animals, and to predict which repairs would be needed before problems arose. She also began to understand the financial side of the ranch. She balanced the budget, calculated expenses for feed and equipment, and considered investments that could improve efficiency and productivity. It was a steep learning curve, but each challenge strengthened her resolve. She felt a sense of accomplishment unlike anything she had experienced before. The ranch was no longer just John's, it was hers too, shaped by her decisions, care, and vision. Despite her growing confidence, Clara faced moments of doubt and fear. Winter brought freezing temperatures and heavy snowfall. One particularly cold night, she discovered that a section of the barn roof had weakened under the weight of the snow. Water leaked into the storage area, threatening the supplies she had carefully stocked. Clara's heart raced as she realized the potential disaster, but she quickly gathered her tools and called the ranch hands for help. Together, they worked late into the night, removing snow, repairing the roof, and securing the supplies. By morning, the crisis was averted, and Clara felt a surge of pride. She had faced the challenge head-on, relied on her team, and protected the ranch she now called home. It was a defining moment, proof that she could handle whatever life on the ranch threw at her. As Clara settled into her role, she also discovered small joys that made the hard work worthwhile. She learned to ride the horses with grace, to enjoy the quiet beauty of the sunrise over the fields, and to savor meals prepared after a long day of work. She began keeping a small garden, growing vegetables and herbs, finding satisfaction in the fruits of her labor. Evenings were often spent on the porch, watching the stars, reflecting on the day, and writing in her journal. Each entry captured her fears, her achievements, and her hopes for the future. These moments of quiet reflection reminded her why she had chosen to stay, why she had decided to face the unknown instead of turning back. The ranch had become more than a challenge. It had become a source of purpose and fulfillment. Clara's relationship with the ranch hands also evolved. They shared stories around the fire, offered advice, and sometimes teased her about her mistakes in a playful way. She began to understand their experiences, their skills, and their deep connection to the land. In turn, they came to respect her knowledge, determination, and leadership. Trust, Clara realized, was built over time, through actions, honesty, and mutual respect. It was not given freely, but once earned, it strengthened bonds and created a sense of community. She felt proud of the environment she was helping to create, a team working together, caring for the animals, and protecting the ranch with dedication and care. One evening, as Clara sat in the quiet of the ranch house, she found a small box of letters from John that had been left behind. She opened them carefully, her fingers trembling slightly. The letters revealed John's hopes for the ranch, his dreams for someone to share it with, and his belief that the land would always be cared for. Reading his words, Clara felt a deep connection to a man she had never met but had come to know through his writings and the life he had built. His hopes, she realized, were not lost. She could carry them forward not as a duty, but as a way to honor his life and his vision. The letters gave her strength, reminding her that even in loss there could be purpose, and even in sorrow there could be hope. By the end of the year, Clara had transformed the ranch in subtle but meaningful ways. She repaired fences, improved pastures, and organized supplies with efficiency and care. She had earned the respect of the ranch hands, the admiration of the townspeople, and the quiet pride that comes from knowing she had faced every challenge and emerged stronger. She realized that life had given her a chance she had never expected, not a life with John, but a life of independence, responsibility, and growth. She had arrived hoping for companionship, but she had found strength within herself, a strength that no one could take away. The ranch, once a symbol of loss and uncertainty, had become a testament to her courage, resilience, and determination. Clara understood now that life was unpredictable. Plans could change, dreams could shift, and loss could strike without warning. But what mattered most was how one responded, how one chose to act in the face of challenges, to learn, adapt, and grow. She had come to America hoping for love, but she had discovered something just as valuable: her own power, her own courage, and the ability to create a life of purpose and meaning. The ranch, the animals, and the people around her were no longer just part of a new world. They were part of her story, a story of determination, growth, and quiet triumph that she would carry forward day by day, season by season. Clara had been living on the ranch for over a year now, and what had once felt impossible was slowly becoming her daily reality. She had grown confident in her skills, learned the patterns of the land, and earned the trust of the ranch hands and townspeople. Yet, she knew that the true measure of her resilience would come from facing challenges she could not foresee. Life on a ranch was never easy, and even a capable rancher could be tested by nature, finances, or unexpected crises. Clara had learned to anticipate problems, but this year would bring challenges that would test not only her skills, but also her courage, determination, and ability to lead others. One morning, Clara woke to a sharp wind whipping through the valley. The sky was gray and heavy with clouds, and the distant mountains were obscured by mist. She stepped outside and felt the bite of the cold, realizing that a powerful storm was approaching. She immediately thought of the animals in the pastures, the barns, and the supplies that were exposed to the elements. With a deep breath, she called Tom and the ranch hands together. "We have a storm coming," she said, her voice calm but firm. "We need to secure the barns, bring the animals in, and protect the supplies. Everyone has a role. Let's move quickly." The men nodded, surprised and impressed by her decisiveness. Clara had learned that leadership was not about giving orders out of fear, but about guiding others with clarity and confidence. The storm, she realized, was an opportunity to test not just the ranch, but the strength of the team she had built. They worked through the morning, tying down loose boards, reinforcing fences, and moving animals into shelter. Clara coordinated the effort, making sure that every task was clear, every worker knew what to do, and every corner of the ranch was protected. The wind howled, rain poured down, and the temperature dropped sharply. Clara's clothes were soaked, her hands raw from gripping ropes and tools, but she refused to stop. She had learned that preparation and action were the keys to survival, and she would not let fear dictate her response. Hours later, they had secured the barns, moved the animals to safety, and protected the essential supplies. Exhausted but satisfied, Clara looked around and felt a surge of pride. She had faced a storm head-on and guided her team through it successfully. It was a moment that reminded her of the strength she had discovered within herself. After the storm passed, Clara began addressing the ongoing financial challenges of the ranch. Managing the land was one thing, but sustaining it economically was another. She had inherited debts and bills left behind after John's sudden passing, and the responsibility now rested squarely on her shoulders. She studied records, compared expenses, and began planning ways to increase efficiency and income. She learned to negotiate with suppliers, manage payroll for the ranch hands, and plan for seasonal needs. Each decision carried weight, and the pressure sometimes felt overwhelming. Yet Clara found that careful planning, attention to detail, and a willingness to ask for advice when necessary allowed her to navigate even the most complex problems. She discovered that leadership was not about knowing everything, but about making thoughtful choices, learning from mistakes, and never giving up. One afternoon, Clara faced another test that challenged her courage. A young horse, new to the ranch, had wandered into a dangerous area near a riverbank. The animal was frightened and refusing to come back, its movements erratic and risky. Clara knew that if the horse fell or panicked further, it could be seriously injured, or worse. She approached it slowly, speaking softly, trying to calm its nerves. The horse flinched, bolted, and almost slipped into the water. Clara's heart pounded, but she did not retreat. Using everything she had learned about animal behavior, patience, and confidence, she managed to guide the horse back to safety. Her hands were scratched, her clothes torn, but the sense of accomplishment was immense. In that moment, Clara realized that courage was not the absence of fear, but the ability to act despite it. She had grown into a protector, a leader, and a caretaker, and the ranch depended on her in ways she had never imagined. As Clara settled further into her role, she began exploring ways to improve the ranch's efficiency and sustainability. She planted additional crops, experimented with better feeding techniques for the animals, and reorganized storage areas to prevent waste. She studied the patterns of the land, noticing which pastures were overused and which areas could support new growth. With careful planning, she implemented a rotational grazing system to keep the fields healthy and productive. These improvements required patience and foresight, and Clara learned to balance short-term needs with long-term goals. Each success, no matter how small, reinforced her confidence and solidified her sense of belonging. The ranch was no longer just a place where she worked. It was a living, breathing home that she nurtured and guided. The community, too, began to recognize Clara's growing presence. People who had once viewed her as an outsider started to approach her for advice, stories, and support. She became known not just as a capable rancher, but as a symbol of determination and resilience. Children waved as she rode past on horseback, neighbors offered help during difficult weather, and the townspeople invited her to local events. Clara had never expected to feel such acceptance in a foreign land, but the connections she formed reminded her that community was built through effort, kindness, and shared experience. She realized that while she had arrived seeking a new life for herself, she had also become part of a larger story, a story of people, land, and shared purpose. Yet, even as Clara thrived, she faced personal moments of reflection and doubt. She often thought of John and the life she had imagined with him. Though his presence was absent, the memory of his letters, hopes, and dreams lingered in her mind. She sometimes wondered if staying on the ranch was truly what she wanted, or if it was simply an obligation to a man she had never met. But the more she worked, learned, and grew, the more she realized that she was no longer living for anyone else. She was living for herself and for the ranch, which had become an extension of her identity. She discovered that fulfillment often came not from following someone else's path, but from creating one's own. One of the greatest challenges Clara faced that year came during the height of summer. A prolonged heat wave and dry conditions threatened the pastures, water supply, and the health of the animals. Clara had to act quickly to prevent disaster. She organized a team to dig new water channels, installed temporary shades for the animals, and adjusted feeding routines to protect their health. Each day was grueling, with the sun beating down relentlessly, but Clara's determination never wavered. She worked alongside the ranch hands, showing that leadership was not about delegating tasks, but about participating fully, side by side with those she guided. By the end of the heat wave, the animals were safe, the fields preserved, and the team exhausted but proud. Clara had proven not only her skill and resilience, but also her ability to inspire others through action and example. As the year drew to a close, Clara took stock of all she had accomplished. The ranch was thriving under her care, the animals were healthy, and the community respected her as a capable and dedicated rancher. She had faced storms, financial challenges, frightened animals, and moments of doubt, yet she had emerged stronger, wiser, and more confident than ever. She realized that she had transformed not just the ranch, but herself. The young woman who had arrived in a foreign country full of hope, fear, and uncertainty had grown into a leader, a caretaker, and a woman of courage. She had discovered the depth of her own strength, the value of perseverance, and the power of believing in oneself. Evenings on the ranch became times of quiet reflection and gratitude. Clara would sit on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the distant hills, painting the sky in colors she had never seen before. She wrote in her journal, noting the successes, the failures, and the lessons learned. She reflected on her growth, the bond she had formed with the ranch hands, and the sense of purpose that had come from taking responsibility for the land. The ranch had become more than a place to live. It was a canvas for her life, a place where she could shape her own story through hard work, thoughtfulness, and resilience. Through it all, Clara began to understand that life's unexpected twists could lead to the most meaningful growth. She had arrived hoping to marry a man she had never met, only to face the shock of loss and the challenge of an unfamiliar life. Yet in that loss, she had discovered courage, skill, and determination. She had learned to lead, to care for others, and to take responsibility in ways she had never imagined. The ranch, once a symbol of uncertainty and grief, had become a testament to her strength, adaptability, and perseverance. Clara realized that the life she had built for herself was not just a replacement for what she had hoped to find. It was something unique, powerful, and entirely her own. By the end of the fourth year, Clara's reputation as a capable and thoughtful rancher was well established. She had survived storms, heat waves, and financial hardships. She had learned to work with animals, manage a team, and plan for the long-term success of the ranch. She had grown into a confident, resilient woman, admired by the people around her and respected for her dedication and intelligence. The ranch was no longer John's alone. It was a living, breathing home shaped by her hands, her decisions, and her heart. She had arrived expecting a new life with someone else, and instead, she had created a life that was entirely, beautifully her own. Clara had spent several years on the ranch now. The young woman who had once arrived full of hope, fear, and uncertainty had transformed into a confident, capable, and respected rancher. The land that had once felt overwhelming now seemed alive with possibility. The barns were sturdy, the pastures lush and green, and the animals healthy and well cared for. The ranch hands worked efficiently, trusting Clara's guidance and following her plans. She had earned their respect, not through titles or authority alone, but through hard work, fairness, and a consistent presence. Every fence repaired, every animal fed, and every difficult decision made had built a life that she could call her own. Yet, even with all her accomplishments, Clara felt that her story was not yet complete. Life had more lessons, joys, and surprises waiting for her, and she was ready to meet them. One of the first signs of her growth came during a particularly harsh winter. The valley was covered in snow, and temperatures dropped far below freezing. The ranch faced the challenge of keeping animals safe, maintaining heat in the barns, and ensuring that the water supply did not freeze. Clara woke before dawn every day, checking on the horses and cattle, inspecting fences, and making adjustments to the barns. She coordinated the team of ranch hands, assigning tasks and helping wherever necessary. The days were long, the work exhausting, and yet she felt a sense of purpose that made every moment meaningful. It was during these difficult times that Clara realized she had truly become the heart of the ranch. The land, the animals, and the people depended on her, and she had risen to meet that responsibility with courage and skill. In addition to weather challenges, Clara faced the ongoing task of keeping the ranch financially stable. She had learned to manage accounts, track expenses, and plan for seasonal needs. Over time, she implemented small improvements to increase efficiency, such as reorganizing storage areas, rotating pastures to preserve grass, and planting additional crops to feed the animals. She also explored selling surplus produce to nearby towns, building a network of support for the ranch. Each success reinforced her confidence. She realized that managing a ranch was not only about physical labor, but also about foresight, creativity, and careful planning. She had grown into a woman who could make decisions under pressure, adapt to changing circumstances, and inspire others to work toward shared goals. Despite the hard work, Clara also found moments of unexpected joy and fulfillment. She developed close relationships with the ranch hands, sharing stories, meals, and laughter. They became her friends, mentors, and even her family in a place far from home. The community began to recognize her not just as a capable rancher, but as a trusted member of the town. Children waved as she passed on horseback, neighbors sought her advice, and she was invited to local events and gatherings. These connections reminded her that life was not just about survival or work, but also about relationships, trust, and belonging. Clara had come to America expecting to find love with a husband, but she had discovered that love could take many forms: friendship, respect, and the bonds formed through shared effort and care. Clara also took time to reflect on the man who had brought her to this place, John. Though he had never met her in person, his letters, hopes, and vision for the ranch had shaped her journey. She often thought about what he might have wanted her to do with the land, and she felt a deep sense of responsibility to honor his memory. The letters she had kept were a constant reminder of the trust and expectation placed in her. They encouraged her to keep moving forward, to make the ranch thrive, and to embrace the opportunities she had been given. Clara realized that while life had not followed the path she had imagined, it had given her something far greater: the chance to shape her own destiny, guided by the lessons and inspiration of someone she had never truly known. As the years passed, Clara faced new challenges that tested her leadership and courage. One summer, a sudden drought threatened the pastures and water supply. Clara had to make quick decisions to protect the animals and maintain the ranch's operations. She implemented water-saving measures, dug additional channels, and adjusted feeding schedules to ensure that the animals remained healthy. She worked tirelessly alongside her team, demonstrating not only skill but also compassion and determination. By the end of the drought, the ranch had survived unscathed, and Clara's reputation as a capable and decisive leader grew stronger. She understood now that resilience was built through action, persistence, and the willingness to face difficulties head-on. Clara also discovered that running a ranch required balancing work with personal reflection and care. She continued to write in her journal, noting the events of each day, the challenges faced, and the lessons learned. These reflections allowed her to understand herself better, to celebrate her growth, and to recognize her achievements. She took walks across the fields, enjoying the simple beauty of the land she had nurtured. She learned to ride horses with ease, to care for the animals intuitively, and to find peace in the rhythm of ranch life. Though the work was demanding, Clara found joy in her accomplishments and the quiet satisfaction of a life lived with purpose and intention. One day, Clara received a visit from a neighboring rancher who had heard about her success. He offered advice, shared insights, and even asked for guidance on managing his own land. Clara welcomed the opportunity to share her knowledge and experience. Teaching and guiding others reinforced her confidence and reminded her of how far she had come. She realized that leadership was not just about managing tasks, but also about helping others grow, building community, and sharing knowledge. Clara had become not only a caretaker of the ranch, but also a mentor, someone whose experience and wisdom could inspire and support others. As she settled into this stage of her life, Clara began to notice subtle but powerful changes in herself. She felt a sense of independence and strength that she had never known before. The girl who had arrived in America, full of hope and fear, had become a woman capable of facing any challenge. She had learned to trust her instincts, to make decisions confidently, and to embrace responsibility without hesitation. The ranch, the animals, and the people around her had shaped her into someone resilient, thoughtful, and compassionate. She understood that the life she had built was not just a replacement for the one she had imagined. It was a unique and meaningful existence, shaped entirely by her own efforts, choices, and heart. Clara also found moments of personal fulfillment and happiness in unexpected places. She discovered a love for planting gardens, tending to flowers, and growing vegetables that nourished both the animals and the ranch hands. She took pleasure in simple routines, baking bread, mending clothes, and watching the sunset over the hills. These small joys reminded her that life was not only about surviving challenges, but also about embracing beauty, care, and creativity. Each day on the ranch offered new lessons, new discoveries, and new opportunities for growth. Clara realized that happiness could be found in the rhythm of life, in the bonds formed through work and trust, and in the quiet satisfaction of a task well done. The community around Clara continued to embrace her as one of their own. She attended local gatherings, helped neighbors in need, and offered guidance to those struggling with ranch work. People began to seek her opinion, knowing she had experience, insight, and a kind heart. Clara felt a sense of belonging she had never expected. Though she had arrived in America hoping to find love with a husband, she had discovered a deeper sense of connection with the land, with the animals, with the people, and with herself. She understood that home was not only a place, but also a network of relationships, respect, and shared experience. The ranch had become a hub of community, a place where life thrived because of her dedication and care. As the years went by, Clara reflected on her journey with gratitude and pride. She had arrived in a foreign country with hope and uncertainty, faced grief and isolation, and overcome challenges that had tested every part of her. She had learned to manage the ranch, lead a team, care for animals, and navigate the complexities of life far from home. She had grown into a strong, capable, and independent woman, admired by those around her and respected for her skill, courage, and dedication. The ranch had become more than a livelihood. It had become a testament to her resilience, determination, and heart. Clara understood that life was full of unexpected turns, and that the true measure of success was not simply achieving a dream, but finding the strength to create a meaningful life, no matter the circumstances. In her quiet moments, Clara often thought of John and the letters he had left behind. Though he had never been physically present, his hopes, dreams, and vision had guided her in subtle but powerful ways. She felt a sense of gratitude toward him for inspiring her journey and giving her the opportunity to discover her own strength. She realized that while the life she had imagined with him would never come to be, the life she had built for herself was richer, more meaningful, and entirely her own. The ranch, once a symbol of loss and uncertainty, had become a place of growth, triumph, and fulfillment. By the time Clara reached her 5th year on the ranch, she had fully transformed both herself and the land she cared for. The pastures were vibrant, the barns well-maintained, and the animals healthy and content. The ranch hands worked efficiently, and the community respected her as a capable, wise, and compassionate leader. Clara had faced storms, financial struggles, and personal doubts, and she had overcome them all. She had arrived hoping for a life with another person, but she had discovered something equally valuable: independence, confidence, purpose, and a life shaped entirely by her own choices. She understood now that true fulfillment came not from following a path set by others, but from creating a life rooted in courage, care, and determination. As the sun set over the ranch, casting golden light across the fields and hills, Clara stood on the porch of the farmhouse and looked out at the land she had nurtured. She felt a deep sense of peace, pride, and accomplishment. The ranch, the animals, and the community had all become part of her story, a story of courage, growth, and resilience. Clara smiled, knowing that life had given her a journey far beyond what she had imagined, a journey that began with hope, tested her strength, and led her to a life of independence, fulfillment, and quiet triumph. She understood that the greatest gift life had offered her was the opportunity to discover herself, embrace challenges, and build a home, a community, and a life entirely her own.